Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Bible study. Glad to have you with us as we finish up the book of John today, beginning at chapter 20, verse 24. Jesus appearing to Thomas. And yes, we'll have to make a little bit of tracks here to finish, but I gave my word at late service on Sunday. We would start Genesis next week, and that is what we will do. So, I'll take a reader for verse 24 through the end of chapter 20. Someone volunteer? Wayne, please.
But Thomas, one of the 12, the one called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples kept telling him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger into the mark of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will never believe." How far do you want me to go?
To the end.
After 8 days, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them, though the doors were locked. Jesus came and stood among them. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Take your hand, put it in my side. Do not continue to doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord, my God." Jesus said to him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Jesus, in the presence of his disciples, did many other miraculous signs that are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name.
Thank you. Thomas, we come across him specifically on 2 occasions, this being the second one, earlier in the Gospel of John, chapter 14. Thomas is the one that questioned Jesus when Jesus said that he was leaving and they knew where he was going, and Thomas said, "Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way?" To which Jesus replied, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." So kind of a inquisitive man, might we say, and here we see it again. We see his kind of weakness, I suppose, or slow to understand what Jesus is saying, but even a little vocal about it. You know, I'm not understanding, not seeing Jesus. I'm not going to believe it until I touch him. And, you know, the disciples a week earlier had seen these marks, and now Thomas seems to take it a step further. You know, so he doesn't just want to see Jesus' nail marks, and he wants to touch them. And I always think this is a good display of Jesus' patience with Thomas. Many times when people ask for a miracle or want Jesus to do something, Jesus will rebuff them. But because there's faith here, because there's, Thomas isn't maybe asking or saying this maliciously, Jesus lets him touch him. And so I guess always the question when I preach on this or you read this, you think, well, you know, how much of this is Thomas's heart talking and how much of it is he hurt? It does seem a bit like he's, just frustrated that he wasn't there and now he's been waiting a week. But is he really doubting the resurrection? Jesus doesn't go there. Jesus says you're doubting it. So you're struggling with it, but it's not necessarily maybe unbelief. Any questions or comments on Thomas? We will look at the questions here in a second too. Yeah.
Not a question, but a comment. This is the setting for one of the most comforting words of Jesus too. Because his response to Thomas is, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed," and that's all of us.
Yeah. You know, I guess, how would you say, I guess what's the remarkable thing about our faith? Maybe I'll put it that way. That Jesus is thankful for.
We have not seen him. We have not witnessed his miracles.
Yeah. So we haven't seen him, we believe.
Everything in our faith is secondhand. I mean, we're reading it, but it's not, we've not experienced it.
Yeah.
We could be a Thomas.
So there's even a greater amount of trust because we haven't seen it. Jesus talks that way too when he says people rejected him, and because they saw him, it would be worse for them. Remember, he says it'd be better for Tyre and Sidon than for you. So Jesus makes this comment a couple of times that people that see me shouldn't struggle as much, but those who don't see me, but believe. What a great faith that is, and very even more impressive than Thomas. Wayne?
It's sort of peripheral to that, but we believe even though we can't explain or understand it. We do that all the time, like those lights in those tubes. I believe they're on, but I don't know how that works. We believe what Jesus said, even if we couldn't always explain it. For example, some people don't believe baptized babies because we don't understand how that could work. Well, that's nonsense, really, if you're going to trust that.
Yeah.
So he believes, even though he doesn't. How Lord? Wow.
No.
It's true.
Amy, a thought?
Poor Thomas getting such a bad rap. The titles of these stories, of course, are not divine inspiration. So I like how our Christ-Light series for children, they've named this Thomas Believes instead of Doubting Thomas, and I like that. Because Thomas went on to do amazing mission work, and too often that gets overshadowed by this one story.
Yeah.
Mine just says Jesus appears to Thomas.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
They used to call it Doubting Thomas.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it's a parallel to Jesus saying how you have to have faith like a little child, and that this seems to be a good example of this, where Jesus would say those who don't see but believe have a simple childlike faith that can't explain everything.
This one says Thomas finally believes.
Yeah.
Well, there's truth to that.
There is.
Yeah.
He did that.
And I think it's always a good reminder too that when you're talking to someone about Jesus, and maybe it's not the best conversation, they could be in a Thomas-like time in their life, right? They're struggling with depression or job loss or what have you, and they just need that time and encouragement. But yeah, you could see where the disciples might not be so excited to have Thomas around if he's going to act like this and talk like this. But they too were patient with him. So. Question 4, how did Jesus deal with Thomas? Let's say he gave him visible proof, and he was patient with Thomas. Apply the hands and feet and side of Jesus still bore signs of the wounds from Good Friday. Didn't Jesus have a glorified body? Why were those wounds still visible? How does it relate to our own glorified states? So Jesus rose from the grave and he kept those marks. And does that mean we'll keep our physical blemishes? Does that mean he wasn't glorified? I mean, yeah, what's some thoughts here, Mike?
My brother-in-law was just here, he had carpal tunnel on his hand right here with the thick part of his palm. And you could still see the scars even though it's healed up. I can show you the scars on the top of my head from cancer, even though they're healed up. You probably don't want to see them.
I think it's reassuring because he was recognizable in his glorified body. There still were physical characteristics that the disciples knew of, and we're going to recognize each other. That's reassuring.
Yeah, so someone told me the other day they went to class reunion after 40, 50 years and didn't recognize anybody. Because everybody got older. And but apparently heaven won't have that problem. You know, we won't get to heaven and everybody's like, Lyle, I don't recognize you without your hair. But it's, yeah, I would not necessarily say this is evidence that, quadriplegics or, people with cancer are going to have those scars or be missing limbs and such. I don't know if that's necessarily proof of that, but it is proof that, you are recognizable in your glorified state. And certainly, there's no thought of, well, I can't go running in heaven because I lost my leg or something. But yeah, for Jesus, I mean, his marks are who he is, right? I mean, it's why we're going to worship him in heaven. And it would be kind of strange for Jesus to say, that's something I'm proud of or shouldn't keep with me, right? It's who he is. So, yeah, Denise?
So we just had the story that, he appeared to the people, the guys here on the way to Emmaus,
Yeah.
and they didn't recognize him until he wanted them to recognize him. And then Thomas recognized him and put his hands in his side because he wanted him to. So, because Jesus is all, that was what was needed. So it was his glorified body.
So yeah, we would make I would have the thought that when on the road to Emmaus, it's not his appearance that's different than now, but it's more or less that our minds are clouded, right? Like so Jesus, and I mean even angels are probably like this too, where they have some sort of way of, I don't know, not fooling us, but fooling us.
Thomas needed to see the wounds and to touch the wounds, so, Jesus made that miracle possible for him.
Yeah. I wonder too, like, did Thomas maybe, if I was Thomas, I might hesitate like a little bit, like, is this a trap, Jesus? Right? Like, I already believe I see you, and now, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, when someone says you're not, press the button, and then they bring the button and like, here, press it, right in front of me, right? Yeah, I think Thomas might be like, whoa, but he did, and Jesus wasn't, it wasn't an I gotcha moment, there wasn't any hate about it. So, yeah, I guess, well, number 6 there, how can people forgive sins? Isn't God the only one who can forgive sins?
People can pronounce what God says.
Yeah, so this goes back before the Thomas lesson, but to last week. But yeah. So verse 23, yeah. So it seems maybe like a conversation that's kind of out of place. He appears to his disciples, and then he talks about forgiveness. But I mean, it's one of those situations where, you know, Jesus is forgiving them and they're to forgive one another. So it really goes back to Jesus is now appearing. Now what? What's the mission? Right? And the mission is to tell people that they have peace, that they're forgiven. And we do that as ambassadors, right? And I think the liturgy does that quite well, you know, as a called servant of Christ. And by His authority, you know, we announce that sins are forgiven. But here again, it wasn't just given to Peter, was it? It was given to the disciples. It was given to the church.
Jesus appears to 7 disciples. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and he threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead.
All right. So they go out fishing. The note there on verse 3, remember the disciples were fishermen by trade. Jesus had told them to wait for him in Galilee. The natural thing for them to do was to go fishing, not recreational fishing, while they waited. Question. Peter's desire to go fishing set up the miracle Jesus was about to perform. How did it do that?
It's gonna kind of mirror when he first called them with the no luck all nights and then we'll try again. And
I noted in Luke 5, when Jesus called them to follow him, Peter was fishing and his associates James and John were in the other boats, and they had a large catch of fish. So, it seems poetic that Jesus is bringing that event back into their minds and through this lesson. Both times they weren't able to keep all the fish. Sure, there was too many, right? We would say, I know the editor makes a note here, and I don't know if I've thought a lot about this, but part of the miracle was that Jesus kept them from catching fish. And I guess that's true, right? If they would have caught fish, this wouldn't have been the same miracle, but Jesus kept the fish away. Kind of like me last Saturday afternoon. She just kept the fish away. I'm kidding because I didn't catch a lot after.
There's probably some truth to that because Peter's experienced fishermen, all those who were by the Sea of Galilee were. But this is interesting, this translation, which is EHV, said, Jesus called them boys, don't you have any fish?
Yeah, that's 3 different translations, huh? Like, I had children in Margaret's, boys in EHV, and friends in the NIV 84. Any other terms used there in verse 5?
We don't know.
What verse are you talking about?
There's 5.
Yeah, so
21 verse 5.
Yeah.
Mine says children.
Right.
Margaret?
The comment note here says children, not a common form of address, but perhaps equivalent to present day boys or guys.
So the NIV went more colloquial and said, since this is more of a friendly greeting. It's
Guys,
it's not that Jesus saying, you children, you don't understand, or we get that in other places where Jesus is making a remark about their faith or something.
This is
fellas,
But this is different.
a
This is more,
friendly,
guys, fellas,
hey guys.
but
hey boys. Yeah.
What's that?
Question 2. So why do you suppose Peter jumped into the water to get to Jesus so quickly? This is always a good thought here. Why?
Because he's Peter.
It was Peter, and Peter was impulsive.
He was impulsive.
I was just thinking what his mother would have thought when he was a little kid.
She had a lot of gray hair.
So Peter's always been a little hard to control, impulsive. Most commentators make the remark that he's been kind of in limbo with Jesus a bit. We don't have any reason to believe that after he denied Jesus, that him and Jesus had much time to talk. These appearances to Thomas and before, I don't know if we should get the impression these are, 3-hour visits with in-depth conversation. They may not be. And you can see Peter kind of, if that's the case, if these other visits and such are not long duration, Peter is wanting to talk to Jesus, and and Jesus certainly is expecting this, and talks about reinstating him. So I think Jesus talks to something that's on his heart, and that's why he's jumping into the water here. Plus, maybe he's just impatient. He knows they can't row the boat to shore that quickly, so he can swim faster. But they kept all the fish because they counted them. So maybe you can imagine James and John being a little frustrated, like we have a bunch of fish and Peter, you're not helping us. So Peter definitely recognizes this is Jesus, wants to talk to him, and it is. Now we have Jesus in question 3. He's fixing breakfast for his disciples, and so how does this fit with the overall way of dealing with them?
Well, he's going to
Jesus.
dine with us in heaven, so we might as well have breakfast here on earth. He's our brother.
Yeah, I don't think I can't think of another time where I know Jesus ate when people cooked for him. I don't know if there's any other time in the scripture that Jesus actually was cooking.
Well, he's a servant leader. He provides for them. He hosts them.
Well, I should take that back. Feeding the 5,000. I guess I don't know how much he cooks, but yeah, we do have. But yeah, he's a servant leader, isn't he? I definitely see this as a slower moment of instruction, and I guess maybe that's what I was kind of leading up to, saying, if Jesus appeared in the locked rooms and such, and maybe it wasn't a lot of time. Jesus sets the table for we're gonna visit, we're gonna talk. Some things we.
Yeah, he wasn't pacing the shore like, come on guys, I told you to wait, why are you guys fishing? Like, you should just be sitting around waiting for him. And then, I'm sure they're hungry, it's been all night. So, come on in, let's keep this casual.
Yeah. No, it's not Margaret.
Well, they all had run away. They all left him in the garden. And he's bringing them back into close fellowship, intimate fellowship again. And then he says, as I have been to you, now I'm sending you out. So Pastor Maki grills the brats. I mean, it's not an unusual thing for him to provide for them.
I don't think the questions talk about it, but what do you make of their line of question and answering? Do you love me? Yes, Lord.
We didn't get that far.
Oh, my bad. I'm
Yeah,
jumping
right now
ahead
they're
already.
just
We haven't
like,
read that
"Psst, is it Jesus? I'm not gonna
Then
ask
we do need to cover that then, don't we?
You ask.
Okay. Let's get to the good stuff then. 15 to the end. Alright. Breakfast is served, Bob.
When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. I tell you the truth. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said, this is to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, Lord, who is going to betray you? When Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. Because of this, the rumor spread among the brothers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written.
All right. So kind of a parallel statement to the end of chapter 20. We had that comment that he did many other miraculous signs, which are not recorded in this book, and then it says again, many other things as well. Maybe not wrong to make that point twice. Maybe the first time it's kind of saying, those those days after the resurrection. I'm not recording everything, kind of put a bookend on the resurrection appearances. And then all this is kind of a bookend to the whole chapter, right? His whole life, saying, just as I said that about his appearances, we didn't record everything. We certainly didn't say everything we could have said about his life. So, nevertheless, gospel writers and John are saying we got everything you needed to know. So now let's go back to the question at hand. We'll look at first question 4. So Peter had said that even if the other disciples fell away from Jesus, he would not. He said that on Maundy, Thursday. Well, his love was greater than that of his fellow disciples. How did Jesus use that statement of Peter's as he spoke with him? How did Jesus use that fact that Peter had denied him 3 times?
It brought his denial to mind to Peter.
But he asked him to.
Yeah. So they're kind of reliving the moment, I would say. You said you love me more than everybody else, and that you would die with me, right? And Jesus asked, well, did you really mean it when you said it? And even though he didn't live it, right? Even though he denied Jesus 3 times, he's getting a chance here 3 times to say, Lord, I'm recommitting myself. I do love you. You know that I do. You know that when I said it, I meant it. And of course that means a lot, right? I think for any sin, in some respects, kind of goes down that same way. You sin against people you love, but are you sorry for that sin? Do you still love them? I think the appropriate answer is yes. We continue to strive to love them, and even though we've sinned against them. And
I think, Jesus is kind of saying to Peter and the disciples, don't, mess with the devil. I mean, the devil is so powerful, and Peter's words are one thing, but actions still are really what, happens. And if you, say, I won't do that, then, it almost is temptation.
Daring the devil.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever, maybe we're all creatures of our times, but would you say Peter and Jesus are having a talk about virtue signaling? Like Jesus is saying, you weren't just virtue signaling, right? Anybody can say they love me, and anybody can say they could die for me. But you really meant it, didn't you? And Peter's saying, I wasn't just signaling to you. I wasn't just saying what everybody wanted to hear, what you wanted to hear. I really meant it. And along those lines, being a Christian is not just, talking a good game. It is, living out your calling. And for Simon and for us, it is to serve others, right? So feed my lambs, feed my sheep, feed my sheep, and so now the way this love is going to express itself is going to be through the gospel ministry, and dedicating his life to it, and I think we try to make the same point about worship. We want God's people in worship, but if it's virtue signaling, if it's us just saying, Lord, we'll love you and follow you wherever you take us, and then, week later or what day later, we're off doing our own thing, sinful thing. That hurts God, right? And that's not us actually living our faith. So Peter, Jesus reinstates Peter. Any other headings? You gotta have some better titles than that, or different titles, or does everybody stay on that?
What heading?
Oh, on verse 15, do all our translations want to say Jesus reinstates Peter, or does it say?
This says, "Do you love me?"
Oh, it says a question, huh? Yeah.
You don't have to.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would say reinstates Peter's a fine way of putting it. Reinvigorates Peter. Reassures Peter. Yeah. I don't know. I think too. Peter's. Can we say Peter's a better disciple because of this? Al's nodding his head. I would say so. Just as I would say Paul is an awesome apostle because he was the worst of sinners. And I would implore you to think of it that way too. I mean, you could look at your past or someone else's past and say, what their trials and their temptations as they come through them certainly make them a sharper instrument of the Lord, or maybe even more dedicated. So, Margaret?
I have the People's Bible here, and the comment which caught my attention here was, "It was time to restore Peter and give him direction. Jesus spoke 3 times to Peter, paralleling the 3 denials. He addressed Peter as Simon, son of John, but not as Peter, the rock. The disciples' rock-like characteristics were not the focus here."
It's like your mom calling you by your middle name. Yeah.
Well, before he said, "You're Peter, and upon this rock," his confession, "I'll build the church." But this time he doesn't emphasize. It says, "More than these can have at least 3 meanings. Number 1, do you love me more than these other disciples love me? Number 2, do you love me more than you love these other men? Number 3, do you love me more than you love these other things?" That is, fishing and all that goes with it. In view of Peter's earlier boasts that all others might fall away, but he wouldn't, the first meaning seems the most likely. But this time Peter was a much humbler man, and not so bold in his claim of love for the Lord. He merely responded, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He could not compare himself to the others. His word for love was not the same as Jesus used, but one that meant something like, "I hold you as a dear and trusted friend." And he did not make the claim on his own, but appealed to what Jesus must know was in his heart. Jesus responded, "Feed my lambs." He gave Peter a standing order to be about the business of feeding the lambs. In the Greek, the word feed can be translated continue to feed. The verb forms again.
Yeah, so his ongoing mission and action of taking care of others, yeah.
And then it also refers to the lambs as the new believers, not just children.
Yeah. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on interpretations of the lambs and sheep and the verb tenses. But to say it's just as you can read in English, it's getting more intense. And that's really what you should take away from here. It's the commitment level is definitely ramping up each time he asks. So it's not exactly him asking the same question 3 times. It does have that flavor and sense of growing importance.
I underlined the closing here where they say, "Imagine what any of us might have said to Peter in similar circumstances. something like, I can't believe your love, nor can I trust you to work for me again after the way you denied me. Instead, Jesus, in forgiveness and love, directed the abject but repentant sinner to become a leader of his people. So Jesus uses us today.
Yeah. And I think, too, I mean, we have impulsive Peter, but he says the right thing here, doesn't he? I mean, he doesn't make excuses. He doesn't try to defend himself and say he'll make it up. He just puts himself on Jesus' mercy and knowledge. And,
You know.
and I think that's a big takeaway, right? When you approach the Lord in a sin, what is your best prayer? What's your best conversation with Him? And it's not, well, Lord, the temptation was just too much this time, and you explain it away, or
Don't make excuses.
make excuses, right? Or promise something you can't promise. Like, Jesus, I'll never do that again. But it was just a simple, Lord, I love you, and yeah, left it at that. So. So Jesus prepared Peter for martyrdom. We have this little conversation here, right? And Peter objected, and so this comment about being led away after someone dresses you to somewhere you do not want to go, verse 18. Why does Jesus bring this up? I know that's not a question yet in our lesson, but I'll ask it.
To show them what's coming ahead in a way, without being specific.
Show them what's coming ahead without being specific. I think in a sermon, well, I know in a sermon maybe 2 months ago, I even let it off. Maybe it was in lines, 3 months ago. But let off by saying it probably wouldn't be good for us to know how we're going to die, right? And kind of a burden to know and expect something to happen. But he tells Peter. Any other thoughts? Why would he tell Peter?
I'm sorry, but I'm blanking on how did Peter die?
So he was crucified upside down,
That's right.
is what historians have told us. And we're told that he requested this. He didn't want to be crucified in the same way Jesus was. So,
Because he was unworthy.
right. So because he was unworthy. So,
Is that fact?
Yeah.
I will say it's not in the Bible, but yes, all historians agree that he was crucified upside down. And it becomes.
So these words here, I think, mean too, like his arms are going to be tied, not nailed to the crossbeam. Without specifically saying this is, drawing it all out.
Well, I see the connection here, and why Jesus would bring this up. If I'm going to try and get into Jesus' head, which is a dangerous thing, if Peter's struggling with the fact that he denied Jesus, and then he's asked 3 times, he says, "Lord, you know I love you." Here's Jesus actually kind of saying, you're not only right, but you're going to be right till you die, right? You're going to be faithful until death now. And so if I'm Peter, I'm hearing, I'm going to die a martyr's death. That's actually a comfort maybe for me, right? I mean, if I'm worried about being the Peter of Good Friday or Monday, Thursday, where I'm gonna get weak again, Jesus says, "Don't worry about it. You're gonna be faithful to the end." And when Peter saw that cross of his coming, he said, hang me upside down. He could reflect back on these words that, this was his life for the Lord, and he served the Lord faithfully. So, I see this as not just an interesting fact, but I think it is a confirmation, Peter. Yep, not worried about you.
Well, and he also says when you're old, so I don't know what they considered old.
Yeah,
But he's
I'm
gonna-
old, Denise. You're old, Denise.
Yeah. But he's gonna
50s,
live to serve the Lord a long time. So what, and, he's gonna have, a life of serving the Lord, and then when you are old, you're going to.
Yeah.
Google says it was another 34 years.
Mhm. So, yeah, mid-60s is kind of getting up there. He's maybe
It's not.
yeah.
Back then.
They didn't have the multivitamins you do.
But I'm just saying, he was gonna have a long time in serving the Lord, so that had to give Peter comfort too.
Yeah, and I think he zeroes in on the old term. I don't know if he processes maybe the martyrdom because of what he says next, right? Because then he starts to think about, well, what about John? How old's he going to be? But John had another thought though first.
So I just have a question. How do you get all of that out of that phrase there? I don't, does it come in the other languages? Because when I read this, I don't know he's gonna be martyred upside down. I read this, it doesn't say that at all to me. So I guess that's.
So I think through. I think through our eyes, we must think old folks home, right? Literally, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when someone tells me I'm going to be dressed by others when I'm
Yeah.
old, and
Right.
you're gonna put me in the home or something, right? But that I would not think culturally that would be what someone's thinking about. I mean, you get sick and you die at home. If someone is leading you to where you don't want to go and you die, I mean, I think it's a little bit more than. I think it's a little more obvious to that.
Crucifixion into that, but
Well,
I'm not
that's true.
doubting it, I'm just,
True, right? You can't get crucifixion on us. I mean, you could get beheading. You could get
yeah.
starved in a cistern or something. Burned at the stake, stoned. He doesn't know. But what I'm saying is, at some point he's not surprised. He's not. He's going to say, this might be what Jesus was talking about. And I don't know. It's just the fact that he chose to be crucified upside down historically, as we understand, makes me think he thought about it. Like if I were to be martyred like Jesus. He's seeing the hate against him. He chooses to be upside down. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know. So I will grant you, maybe we are romanticizing a little bit here, but this is definitely not construed as by John and Peter as I'm gonna die at my in-laws' house and they're gonna dress me. I mean, it's not that type of thing. And I know you're not saying that, but
John is definitely right. That's not here. That's from the tradition and the history of what happens to him. So then going by that, and you look here, it says his arms are tied. Well, okay, that fits with that tradition, but that's not in this text here. You're
We're
right.
using history to interpret what it
Yeah, I
says.
mean, I knew all this history, but when I read this, I don't get that at
No,
all.
it's not in here.
Okay.
Just that he will suffer at the end,
Right,
basically.
right.
You're right.
yeah. It would be interesting. I mean, do you stretch out your hands and someone will dress you? Do you take that together, or do you kind of take that separately? I think you could take that separately, and you get that idea of a crucifixion being alluded to. Naomi?
Jesus did not say that Peter would be martyred, but when the time came and he would be martyred for his faith, which it seems to happen, he would know that his faith and service lasted to the end.
Yeah. But at some point, you're like, if you're an apostle of Jesus and you're told someone's going to lead you where you don't want to go, I mean, it makes a lot of sense that this is some sort of prison or this is some sort of death or crucifixion or what have you, right? I mean, it's hard to construe this much any other way, I would think. But then again, I mean, just you get into the thought here. So Peter heard this, and his gut reaction is to say, "What about John?" Right? And we've kind of talked about John being that silent leader kind of guy, right? He's the inner three, and Jesus. And here's another thing Jesus says that's been misconstrued, right? Jesus says, well, if I want him to remain alive till I return, what is that to you? So there's the myth or the fable of the wandering Jew, that people heard Jesus say this, that's there's someone that's been alive since Jesus' time, and it's like, no, that's not what Jesus said. But nevertheless, right, Jesus is saying, don't worry about how long John's going to live, and John certainly didn't take it that way. So this seems to be a parenthetical statement, right? Jesus' words end at 22, and then a little bit later, verse 23 is a explanation from John. But at the moment, in the moment, apparently, the disciples and other people who heard this kind of thought John wouldn't die. And John was saying, no, that's not what Jesus was saying.
And he's the writer. He's the one who did me.
Right, so John is the one who dies a natural death on the island of Patmos,
Right.
we believe, right? So, did someone look it up? Maybe we think Peter was crucified in Spain, or he gets to Spain, but we don't know where he's crucified.
Well, it was
Or I'm
Roman
thinking of
Emperor sent him.
Right.
Nero?
I think Nero, yeah. So,
I don't think it's me.
His body is in St. Peter Basilica. I don't know how that happened, and I don't know if it really is.
well, and that's the thing too, right? Even when Luther posted the 95 Theses, it was on the occasion that they had some of these relics, some of these martyrs' bones that came to Wittenberg, and people would come to gather to see them. So, if anybody had 11 fingers or 12 toes, it was the apostles, because they were, their bones were everywhere, and so. But yeah.
And some were
Tradition is he's
pig
buried
bones,
there.
I heard.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so quickly then, 5, Jesus prepared Peter for martyrdom. Peter objected as he had done before. In fact, he was jealous of John. Why? Did Jesus really say that John would not die? So he's kind of hearing about his death, and I don't know if he's jealous. I don't know if I agree with the editor there, but he's definitely curious. Well, Jesus, as you're putting out predictions of our future, what about John?
Yeah, that's me into it.
So, and again, it kind of goes back to my point. I don't think the point was Jesus to play fortune teller here, but just to assure him, you're gonna be faithful till the end, I know this. You know this. John?
But doesn't it just show that he's human? I mean, wouldn't it, you know, if somebody predicted our death to be, you know, something unpleasant, and we have this very close associate, what about him? You gonna treat him the same as me, or is he gonna get a better deal? You know, I mean, that's just human nature, right? I mean,
I think so.
so it shows that he's a sinful human being, just that he's a believer and trusts in Jesus. I mean, we all
Yeah.
have those same weaknesses.
Yeah. And I think the point is the point. Jesus goes back to say, you must follow me. And, but yeah, who was Peter close to? Peter and John were close. Yeah. All right, so apply. Some Christians have life easier than others. Some suffer for the gospel more than others. Jesus uses Peter's words to help. Use Jesus' words to Peter to help you deal with these facts. Margaret?
This was reassuring to me. As a mother, how much responsibility do I have for the life my children lead and the choices they make? And when I read this section last night, I underlined in my little book here, each disciple does the most good by faithfully carrying out his own service to Jesus, not by watching out for what others are supposed to be doing. And that was reassuring for me.
Baba?
Yeah, in a nutshell, what is that to you? You must follow me, that's it. What is that to you? You shouldn't be thinking about what other Christians are, how they're being treated or anything. Just follow me and it'll be good.
Yeah, God, the Lord Jesus has a great path for each of us for service, and it's your path, you know. And it's not my path, and it's not his path or her path. You know, I think we're unfair to ourselves if we expect our ministry or our motherhood or friendships to all, you know, take a certain route because we don't have the same gifts or the same opportunities and same length of life, even, right? Wayne?
Just to wind up about Peter's death, it says here that crucifixion took place at the foot of the Vatican Hill, so it's possible his body was in the basilica.
That's what they say.
Amy?
If we live for the Lord. If we die for the Lord.
That's
So whether we live or die, we
We are
belong to
the-
the Lord. That's right.
Yeah.
Win-win.
So, wrapping up the whole book here, just in a little bow. The Word became flesh, right? That's how John started it. And we have John's account of Jesus' life and ministry. And as he recorded this ministry of Jesus, we saw a lot about forgiveness. You know, Jesus paying for our sins and forgiving us and forgiving his disciples. We saw and learned more about Jesus' love, right? John's big theme of love. And we know this is the truth. The true word, and that's again spoken by Jesus and John, that these words are trustworthy and everything Jesus said is undeniably true. So, and there you have it.
Okay.
Well, God's word is
our great heritage and shall be ours forever, to spread its light from age to age, shall be our chief endeavor. Through life it guides our way, in death it is our stay. Lord, grant while worlds endure, we keep its teachings pure.
Through